projects, they may be running their own communities, they might be just trying to get their work done, and you can't really make all the time in the world for everything. So, since I promised some pain and how not to do this, let's start with my personal failures, shall we? We're gonna hop into the time machine, woo, and we're gonna go back to my college days. So you know this is antiquity. Fresh-faced out of college, I had a PHP job, and of course I was building websites. When you build websites, you use a framework. And like everyone else, I built my own PHP web framework. So I worked for a small startup called Remarkable Umbrella, which is unimportant, doesn't exist, you'll never find anything about it, but we insisted on writing our own PHP framework. And at that point, PHP 5 had just come out, brand new, nice and object-oriented, cleaned up a bunch of APIs, made life kind of better, and we decided that, hey, we're gonna jump on this, we're gonna build this and make our products and stuff better. It was pretty good, actually. There weren't a lot of other options at the time that we released it, so there was a very sparse set of choices, and it had some solid code. It looked a lot like modern web frameworks look. You had models, you had views, controllers, and all kinds of helpers and nice templating and things like that. I built it, but nobody ever came and really used it. I think the grand total of downloads was something like 250 ever. So not exactly a resounding success. So why did it fail? Well, I wrote some docs, but they weren't a lot of docs. And really, if it was anything beyond an install piece of documentation and the tutorial and a couple examples, that was it. And it turns out that's not enough. Weird. Development was super opaque. There was no public VCS. I mean, at the time, I could have been publishing to SourceForge. Yeah, antiquity. And I was just releasing tarballs, which really didn't help anyone who was trying to follow development. There were a couple people, and I was doing them no favors. Lack of exposure. This one's hard. And it's hard to this day for small developers to get exposure to their projects. Things like PyCon are great because you can get up on a stage, you can start a lightning talk, and you can inform a wide variety of people about your project that may solve their problems and just they don't know because it hasn't come up in the top 10 of Google or whatever. There's some shortcuts to this, but it's hard. Lack of support channels. Man, I really did everyone a disservice. It was horrible. There was no mailing list. There was no way really beyond an email address to get a hold of me, and everything was one-on-one. Fine for the relatively small number of people who adopted it, but that doesn't really do anybody a lot of good in the broader context of things. And there was no place to report issues. I hope no one ever found a bug, because, yeah. It turns out when you're fresh out of college, what's a bug tracker? This didn't appear on the syllabus. And mind you, this was before things like Zen Framework and Cake PHP and everything else. I mean, this was really early. So let's fast forward a couple years, and 3 years later, I had already been in the Django community, actually when I was building Remarkable Framework, and it was time to build a search library, and I built this thing called Haystack. Pluggable backends, lots of search engines, whatever. It had some decent usage. As of a couple months ago, it had like 1.5 GH stars and lots of people downloading it. And I did some things better that made it better, and that's why you see much bigger numbers than 300. But progress. A year and a half later, I built a thing called Tastypie, which was just RESTful APIs. Not really, kind of tangential to this talk, but again, a decent amount of usage. And the PyPy number actually lies because I forced a lot of people to use Git for a long time. And in both of these, I tried to figure out what I had done wrong with previous communities and start trying to address it to make them better. And some things that I started out with were lots of docs. Tutorials, guides, API documentation, deep dive stuff. I pushed them up to public version control very, very early on, 2 weeks, maybe 3 within the initial commit, and was trying to share with people. And say what you will, GitHub, Bitbucket, even Bazaar are good choices as long as it's something visible that other people in the open source community can see and can follow and keep track of. I added on things like IRC and a mailing list that I support to this day. And I made sure that I put it in front of others. It's not enough to just make a blog post, put it up on the web, and let Googlebot index it. You actually have to try and capture attention in order to get people to start adopting. And I gave them both their own sites and domains. And this sounds really kind of niggly and like, why would you do this? But don't underestimate the value of a vanity URL. Having a central, easy-to-access place that people can find without having to go Google first or bookmark it or something crazy gives people a centralized place to go to. And as far as this one goes, I recommend finding a designer and either promising them favors or making sure they get hooked on what you built so that they help you out. So, I'm human. This is imperfect. What went wrong? And believe me, things have gone wrong. Single committer. This is a necessity when your project is small and causes horrible problems later on. How scalable is a single node? Not very. And it turns out I fail. Weak release notifications. Really not very good about updating those little vanity sites that I mentioned. Yeah, that turns out to be important. I had some early documentation issues because I was hosting things myself and trying to just push it up and keep it all nice and cohesive on the same site. Don't do that. I highly recommend just cheating and put it up on Read the Docs and forget about it. Make it Eric's problem. Thank you, Eric. Another big problem that only recently I was able to address is having no contribution guidelines. This is something that, you know, it's not like your first thing that you do through the docs. It's not maybe the fifth thing you do when going through the docs. But if you find a bug or want to issue, you know, some kind of a patch, this kind of thing matters. So I'm sure you're noticing common themes. So, how do you start a community, or why you came here? First of all, you want to have uniting purpose. This usually falls out of the software itself. You start with something that you have an itch and you're trying to scratch it. But the thing is that that's all in your head. And your head isn't geographically distributed, it's not CAP. It's really actually hard to know what other people will do with your software. And you'll find crazy things being done that you never expected. So you can either choose to ignore those things and say, hey, that's outside the domain of my software, or you can find reasonable applications and let some more of those people in and welcome them and help them and accommodate them. Another nice thing about being accommodating is you get fewer hostile forks. This kind of goes along with united purpose, but it's a little bit different. You can be united behind something that is very fragmented or does a lot of different things and isn't very concentrated. And that can be a success, but the more you can focus down and pare things down to what should be happening, the better things will move forward and the more cohesive things will be. You really don't want your software to be an end-all unless you're really confident it can be that end-all for everyone, which involves a lot of prediction. And did I mention damn you fleshy people? Because, yeah. I recommend spinning things off. If things start to get unfocused, maybe it's time to think about, can we build on advanced functionality in a separate package? Documentation. This is actually easy and hard all at the same time, and it has to be addressed early on. Unless you have, bare none, the sexiest piece of software that has ever been released, most people aren't going to source dive your code the first try. They just are busy. They don't have enough time. They need to make sure and evaluate if it's even worth using your software to start with. So, documentation is their gateway into your software and hence into being a community member. Case in point, short of Raymond's talk this morning, how many of you have heard of Flask? Hey, look at that. That's 100% of the audience pretty much. What about Bottle? Hey, that's still pretty good. How many of you have heard of IDI? Not quite as good. IDEO is the web framework that I made, the minimalist web framework, that actually came before Bottle and Flask. And actually, if you use Bottle, you use a descendant of IDE. True story. But it didn't have any docs. I failed at this one horribly. I gave them a directory of examples. No, nobody picked it up. And Flask's launch was such a huge success, in part because there was good documentation there, and it already built on other things that were well documented that people could latch onto. And a lack of docs means frustration, so you give up early. Communication. Nothing is more important to your open source community than communication, because without good communication, you won't move forward. You'll find lots of points of argument or things that the community isn't on the same place that you are. People want to know that you're actively working on things or what things are important to your project. And if you have people who are collaborating, they need to know, is my contribution gonna be worthwhile, or am I wasting 2 hours of my life for something that's never gonna get merged and I'm gonna have to maintain indefinitely? Additionally, having good channels of knowing when things are coming out or what's going on are important. It seems obvious, but it's hard, and you can't really avoid it. So things like IRC, mailing lists, websites, a lot of the communication things that we've mentioned are really important, especially as a project grows. Similarly to communication, communication tends to be two-way. You have a talk back and forth. Feedback often comes in the form of one-way communication. It's your users talking to you. You may have a chance to respond, but they're starting the conversation, and they're usually getting a lot of the things out of the way up front. Your users need a forum that they can be voicing their issues in, and what they need. They also are going to find tons of holes in your software. No matter how good it is, no matter how complete your test coverage is, they will find issues. And they have lots of good ideas. They're programmers just like you. Sometimes they have bad ideas too, but there's a lot of good to be had there if you're willing to open up and listen. Similarly, separating the wheat from the chaff is really hard to do politely. People may have really bad ideas about what should happen with your software, and finding a nice way to say, hey, that may be a really good use case, but it doesn't fit what most people of this library are going to want, is hard to do in a polite way that doesn't shut someone down and turn them away. You need to show progress. I'm really bad at this one because my commit log oftentimes is the only source of progress, and that involves work. Nobody likes using the creaky old library that was built on Python 3.3. Oh God, that's so out of date these days. Ugh, this is gonna break. No. Your releases and your progress should be a celebration. Your users should be able to celebrate with you that, hey, more progress has been made. My bug fix got into this release. I am so excited to go forward. And you need to make contribution easy. Things like GitHub and Bitbucket have gone a long way with forks and pull requests and stuff, but you need to make it even easier. If it's not dead simple, only the expert users will be giving you anything. And I wish I could really pontificate about this one, but I'm pretty bad at making contribution easy. So figuring this out is something that you're going to have to do and think about to make it a success. You should listen. Being gracious and listening politely and responding correctly to everything is really important. You should consider yourself a success once you first start to get haters. So good for you. Somebody bashes your software, you're like, yes. I say yes, but I'm really thin-skinned, so it's actually really bad. I'm like crying first, and then like the next day I'm like, yes. Whatever. So, I told you this talk was going to be about how not to build a community. We got a little bit of that, but let's have a little more pain, shall we? So, here's some things that you should absolutely, positively never, ever, 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 ever do. You should never feel obligated. I am so bad at this. I started out with a lot of my projects trying to provide like basically all hours support, day, night, late evenings, and this leads to burnout. And burnout leads to resentment, and resentment leads to, you can quickly garner a very bad reputation online by simply being burnt out and responding too curtly to somebody. And the flip side of this is that we work in open source, or we work with open source a lot. If they're not paying you, technically you're really not obligated. You should feel obligated to do things like security releases, or if a patch is good, make an effort to move forward. But at a certain point, you need to reserve time for yourself. And once you start tasting success, it's really easy to fall in this trap of feeling obligated. Not letting others in. You're like, God, you're precious. And no. If you feel like you're behind, you're actually further behind than you think, and it's time to start finding others who can help you. And it's actually really hard to do, because if you've been growing this project from square one, there isn't anyone who knows the code base as well as you. There isn't anybody who follows the same style necessarily. They don't have all the tribal knowledge of this project. And addressing things like quality, style, commit guidelines, attribution, doing triage, all these things are things that you've already internalized as the process of running a community, but are actually really hard to convey to someone else. Always be documenting. Seriously, there is no point where you actually should stop documenting at any point in the life cycle of a piece of software, short of, hey, it's off in the green pastures and we're going to put her down. But most people think of API docs, and that's not the only form of documentation you should be providing to your community. Things like license, authors, the README, maybe a changelog, your standards for your code, steps to filing an issue. These things are really important, and they're documentation that your users need to be successful in working with your community. Not communicating enough, I like beating a dead horse. You really have to communicate. Users aren't staring at your repo all day. They don't live in the code the way you live in it. And if you're not communicating, they don't know. And I'm bad at this one too. But this is the worst. Long release cycles. Oh goodness, so many long release cycles. Letting go is really hard to do. You always have that last little bit that you're trying to polish or chip away or just get to a shine. You need to let go of that, because there's always going to be more features, more bug fixes, more things that people need. So you fix a major bug or you push a big enough feature, it's time for a release. Let go of the things that are almost done and push it out there, because people will appreciate seeing the development progress, as well as just knowing that there's some new shiny thing they get to upgrade to, most of them. Lack of empathy. We engineers are great at this, right? Social skills? Remember that these people that you may be dealing with are going to be the entire gamut of users. You may have a Python core committer one day, and the next day you might have a newbie who literally is like, hey, this is my first week with Python, and I'm already trying to dive into your project and use it. Help me, please. That last anecdote happens to me about 3 times a week, literally. Newbies who have just literally their first steps into development and are like, hey, I need a filterable, searchable, RESTful API that can do 1,000 requests a second and works for all these browsers and uses a crazy serialization format. This is gonna happen. And so they don't know your code base like you do. Things that seem obvious to you aren't obvious. And the best thing you can be doing is recording your conversation with them, logging it, and making documentation out of it so that you can point the next person to this. Save yourself some time, save yourself some pain, and save other people some effort, because then they don't have to wait on you. Not listening is another big problem. Sometimes the community is right. Sometimes you're right, it is your baby, it's your software, but people have lots of good ideas, and it's very worth your time to listen to those ideas. So, in conclusion, Running a community is not rocket science. Nothing I've said here is deep dive technical stuff that you probably couldn't have figured out on your own. But it is a whole lot of social science. You have to deal with the human element on the other end, because that's how you get people welcomed in and adopted into your community. You need to be understanding, have that empathy, even when it sucks. And you're like, I just want to be done for the night, leave me alone on IRC. You need to understand that that person doesn't know any of the things, and they need help. Provide a venue for them to communicate with you in, and be passionate. And you win. I think I'm a little ahead, so there should be plenty of time for questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left for questions. Feel free to make your way up to the mic. And as you make your way up to the mic, just have a quick announcement. Tonight is the Pie Ladies auction at 6:30 p.m. I guess they have some really cool stuff to bid on, including original Disney artwork and things signed by Guido. I don't know what is signed by Guido, but I hope it's actually something interesting, because I feel like, you know, Guido's here.
Yeah.
But so hopefully it's something good.
Hi, Shay Silverman. I really don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you, because I run a small distro called PieMame for the Raspberry Pi, and I am currently getting into all those bad situations that you pointed at. So thank you again for kind of the enlightenment, and now I know what not to do. So thank you.
Yeah, no
I appreciate it.
It's a really slippery slope. Be very careful.
Hi, I'm Alita Dunn, and I am currently working on a project that's going from a one-person project to what I hope will be a project with a large community. And I am interested in your advice on how to make sure, well, one of the things I'm struggling with is that I'm a little embarrassed about the code base right now. I'm still a beginner programmer, and it's pretty darn hacky. And I'm hesitant to share it with people, knowing that they'll look at it and say, oh yeah, I'm not sure I want to get involved in that because it's just so flawed.
I don't think you'll find a lot of people who say from the get-go that this code is so flawed. Unless it's a security issue, I don't think they're going to back away just in that principle. Remember that most people starting out aren't going to do a source dive. I mean, I do it, but I know a lot of people who don't do that. Your docs are going to be much more important, and establishing guidelines on how to improve this. Admit to them openly that you don't think that this code is the most wonderful, but it does solve this problem, and that you're open to this kind of contribution. And then make it really obvious for them how they can do that contribution. And you have to almost shepherd people through the process and make sure that they learn something in the process of helping you get better. Even advanced programmers can learn things from patching new pieces of software that maybe aren't the best written in the world.
Great, thank you.
A quick comment to answer that. That's actually, for experienced programmers, that's a great way to contribute to a project. If your project gives some value, but the code's not great, that's a great way for someone to jump in and make their first patch, to just clean up some of your code, and maybe you'll learn something in the process and the code gets better. My question is about hire a town crier, and you also mentioned recruit other people to help. Do you have advice for how to find someone and get someone to have the commitment to the project that you have?
So what I would recommend, and that's a great question, I would recommend finding the newbies. You will find some people who join your community who are really excited, but feel that their code quality, I'm sorry I lost you, feel that their code quality isn't the greatest. Those people are probably really excited and really just want to take their first steps. And oftentimes, if it can be of any kind of help, they would love to be helping you get the word out, or do things like change log and things. So hire a town crier. No, probably you don't have to pay anybody, but find passionate users. Find people who really use your code or really depend on it, and you'll see them coming up time and again. And then politely ask those people. Say, hey, I am swamped. I can't keep up with this, or I don't have enough time and focus, but I think it's really important. Can you please help me? There are tons of people who would jump at the chance. Remember that the people who use your software is probably like 80% of the base. The people who patch your software or provide support requests is like 20%, and the actual like core contributors is whatever negligible, close to zero values we have left. So there's a huge base of people. If anyone is using it, guaranteed there's still a bigger base than just you who might be able to help.
Hi, I'm Marco from Italy, and I want to talk about the third project, the third community you didn't talk about in the talk.
Oh, Django
and I wanted to thank you for the Django Dash.
Cool.
It's
thank you.
Amazing every year, amazing 48 hours. Thank you.
Hang on. Shh. It's actually going to get better this year.
Cool.
We're going to open it up probably to WSGI applications so that anyone can submit pretty much anything that's Python and dumps out a web page. So people like the Pyramid folk or the Flask folks and stuff will actually be able to get involved and probably try and bring in the broader community. Rebranding, I'm not sure on, and how all this is going to work. It's still kind of early, but come summer, that's going to be a thing.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, I'm not sure if this is in your wheelhouse, but talking about your point where, you know, don't feel obligated unless they're paying you. I founded an open source project, but I'm not a coder, so I've relied on developers to actually build it for me. And it started out, I was giving, you know, as much money as I could to one developer who was basically taking it and then also volunteering a lot of hours. You know, this is much below his regular rates. When he had to back out due to work commitments, another developer sort of took over as lead programmer, and he's basically just volunteering all his time. But the project does generate a small amount of revenue, and I want to know how to fairly apportion it to developers without making any of them feel compromised, taken advantage of, unfairly treated. Any ideas?
So that's a tough one, and there's lots of different approaches. One is a bounty system. So find the things that are most painful to work on and offer essentially like, you know, monetary compensation for those things. Another is trying to devise a system where, you know, so it gets hard, because if you just start counting lines of code and then like percentage it off of that, that's not necessarily equal to developer effort. I mean, it may take only 2 or 3 lines of expressive Python to get something out, but took 5 hours of research before that to figure out, you know, what is the API we're talking to, what authentication credentials are there, what kinds of things do we need to approach, and it's actually really, really hard. The best thing I would do, or could recommend, is talk to those developers and ask them what they feel is fair. And then maybe find a couple other developers who aren't even on the project and ask them what's fair and try to come to some kind of consensus that everyone's happy with. And that's hard.
Thank you.
Hey Daniel, this is Seth Cloninger from Stanford University. Thanks for your stuff, and thanks for the good talk. How do you deal with the large, misguided pull request from random person who you've never talked to? I've got a new project, and I'm starting to get some of those, you know, 100 files changed from some person you never heard of.
My favorite are the PEP8s.
Yeah.
It's like I have an existing style that's close to PEP8, but no, you're going to make it really PEP8. And then they bury a actual patch in there with it. I'm getting better at this one. I used to be horrible, because my approach to that before was, I will take your patch, thank you, I will give you attribution, and then I rewrite whatever I need to and go through everything, or write all the tests and then put it in. But that doesn't scale. And that was a hard one for me to get over. So contribution guidelines are a good first step. Show them how you want things to go in. And then give them a style guide. Even if it's just, you know, one of your existing files, find a file that's in your project that you've already written that is a great example of a lot of different combinations of things, and say, this is the style we apply to, that applies to our code. English, blah, blah, blah. I don't. Find something that they can kind of latch onto. As far as huge pull requests, make sure that it's only addressing one thing, first of all. Pull requests or patches should really be as pared down as they can be, even to the point of like, maybe, hey, docs aren't included, this one, we're going to land that with the next thing. You need to have it small enough that you can actually internalize it, make sure you've got a good understanding of what's going in, because you're going to have to support it, and you need to basically just kind of guide them. If you do the work for them, you're basically selling them short and selling yourself short, which was really hard for me to accept, but this is a growing opportunity for both of you. You get better at leading your community and about how to interact with others and developing empathy, and they get a chance to learn something new. And some people react to that badly. Some people get mad, oh, you're messing with my style. Well, my style is mine, and you should just accept it, or I put a lot of work in. Yes, you're right, you did. Thank you for your efforts. I will try and just mangle this a little bit and put it in. So you have to, there's some give and take, but you really have to just kind of shepherd through as best you can.
Okay, well that's about all the time we have unless there's any other quick questions. But let's thank Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you.